So a lot of the tournament trails in the country cracking down on live scope. You know, the Bassmaster Elite Series, we can use it in one tournament, we can't use it in the next. BFLs, you can only use it a couple hours a day. A lot of local trails are having no live scope tournaments. So what I kind of want to talk about is wintertime, early spring strategies, cold water strategies that involve, you know, maybe sonar, but traditional sonar on some of the techniques, not live scoping with fish. A lot of the techniques are still the same. You just obviously land on them with live scope, so it's a little bit easier. But I want to talk about how I target fish without it. In cold water situations, early spring, you know, late winter like we're getting right now, obviously there's two things that make wintertime fishing easier without electronics. Like whether I used to fish a lot in my John boat in the winter, and with that being said, it's dirty water and vegetation. That's the two things that help the most if you want to target shallow water fish in the winter. Because a lot of fish in the winter, they just inherently go out deep. That's what they like to do. That's where a lot of the bait goes. But in vegetation, they're gonna stay shallow. And in dirty water, they're gonna stay shallow. And a lot of the baits I kind of throw in those two situations are kind of the same. It's kind of a lot of the same type baits. So one of the go-to baits up shallow in the cold water, you know, that springtime, late winter, is a red crankbait. So a red crankbait, I'll show you kind of the different crankbaits I go. For some reason, in that cold water, it's weird, in like December, you know, November, December, some places already cold. We get cold here sometime. That red's not quite as good, but it's something about when it breaks into like mid-January, especially February, this bright red color, it looks like a crappie bobber coming through the water. Don't know why it works. Wish I knew exactly, but never seen a bright orange crawfish running through the water. That's what we say, it looks like a crawfish, but generally crawfish aren't that bright. That's a little excessive. But they just really like this red color. And there's kind of different crankbaits I throw, and I'll kind of break down some of them. But one thing I've really got fond of this year especially is these itty bitty crankbaits. If y'all follow me on social media, you've been seeing I've been catching some pretty big ones on this tiny little crankbait. But these little bitty crankbaits are super productive in that cold water. I think it's something about the size of it, tiny. They're hard to throw. The way I'm throwing this bait is really two ways. I'm either throwing it on a spinning rod, or I've been throwing it on the Arc BFS setup. The BFS will cast it really well. The problem with BFS is if you're catching like really big fish, you know, you might catch a big old striper on this thing reeling it back. I've had it happen a few times this year, lifting it out of the water, a big old striper eat it. BFSs are not meant for that. The BFS setups are like for catching small fish. They're for like fishing creeks, throwing little 16th ounce baits. They cast them great, but it's not really what it's meant for. If you catch a 6-pounder on this, that reel's not really meant to handle 6-pounders or 20-pound stripers, things like that. You can catch them. I've caught plenty on it, but sometimes a spinning rod is a little more effective for this little thing. So these little finesse red crankbaits is something I've really started using this year. But without, not just the little bitty ones, I also throw a lot of, this is Arc CM 3-6. This 3-6, 3-2-6, I don't know exactly how you say it, but it's a square bill, but it's like a tight wobbling square bill. It's a really good bait for, it's like got that square bill deflection like it does off wooden things, but it has a little bit tighter wobble and dives a little bit deeper. So that's just a square bill crankbait. It's still a great bank run bait. We got that bright red again. And it's great for running down the bank. And there's a lot of other crankbaits. Crankbaits are one of the things I've learned over the years that you've watched all my videos. I'm pretty simple type fisherman. Like I'm gonna throw green pumpkin in a zoom worm, tilapia maybe, or I'm gonna throw, you know, white in a horny toad. I don't change it up that often. But when it comes to cranking, the styles of crankbaits, like these are probably my two main ones in Arc, and I add in their flat side model too, but it's very similar to this bait. But crankbaits are one of those things you gotta experiment with. Like I got a bunch of old balsa crankbaits I love to throw, like old flat side handmade crankbaits. I've got some old Yozuris that I like to throw still. Crankbaits are one of those things you gotta have a bunch of them. You gotta experiment with, because I've seen multiple days where just one crankbait outperforms all the rest. So I'll tie on 6 or 7 different crankbaits that all, pretty much this time of year, it's a lot of this crawl color, but that all run similar depths of what I know I'm gonna be fishing. And one will be way more productive than the rest of them. Don't know why, exactly. It's just certain days it changes. So I don't think there's always one textbook thing. I do have really became fond of this finesse style crankbait though. This thing's like 1 7/8 inches long, and it's a really, really good bait for run down the bank. So cranking is probably the go-to way in cold water without, you know, you can literally not utilize any electronics. I used to, when I didn't have a boat in the winter, like I'd sell my boat and take my little duck boat, John boat out with 15 horsepower on it, run down the bank with a crankbait and just targeting rock. So when I'm cranking, rock's always gonna be your number one go-to. That's what you're looking for. The rock holds a little heat. It's got crawfish around it. Fish just like rock in the winter. Wood can be productive too as it gets a little bit warmer, but you kind of want to pay attention. Like, did I get bit off a laydown? Did I get bit off a dock? What was that, like a little, you know, brush pile in front of a dock that the fish came out of? Or was it a rocky point, a channel swing bank? So you kind of got to put together, it's actually very, very patternable, especially in dirty water when those fish get up shallow in the winter, because they will stack up on, you know, little places, little groups. You might have a whole rocky bank, but one spot on that bank that's really, really good. And that's one thing that LiveScope has actually taught me is, I'm not, like, even if you're not using it, I've learned that from using it, that when I catch a fish, quite often, most of the time in the winter especially, there's a lot of fish with that one. If you're cranking, you know, going down the bank and you catch a fish, I'm not saying you're gonna get another one to bite, but pay attention to those specific places. Don't, like, that bank may be good in general, but that one spot where you caught that fish, very, very likely is there another fish in that location. So crankbaits are probably my number one winter way to catch fish, and that's, you know, dirty water. It doesn't have to be dirty. That's kind of like what a lot of people think, oh, it's not dirty enough to catch them cranking. Well, as it gets a little later, when it's like dead winter, like January, it probably needs to be a little dirty. But as it gets a little later in the year, you start being able to get bit in clear water cranking. And I've caught fish on that bright red crankbait on Lake Hartwell on the lower end before, on a decently windy day with some chop, just running down the bank. So it's more, the later it gets, the more susceptible they are to that, I guess. The second bait that is great wintertime pre-spawn bait when you're talking cold water is a Lipless. This is a Z63 Lipless. I really like this bait. This is a brand new and red, same red color. You know, it's a trend here. I do throw a lot of shads though around here, especially because a lot of fish will get on bait back in pockets, and I carry like your typical, you know, chrome and blues, things like that. Your shiny ones for those shad eating fish. But these baits are really good in grass especially. So that's what we mentioned, grass and dirty water. So this is a bait I'm gonna keep tied on in any time there's grass. And I think what a lot of people do wrong, and I used to do it wrong a lot, you know, about to go to Lake Guntersville for an elite tournament with no live scope, is when you fish these baits, people fish them way too fast, especially in the grass. I think a lot of times in that cold water in grass, you almost have to fish this bait like a worm. With that being said, you throw it out and drag it along. When it kind of settles on the grass, you drag it, kind of pop it, clean it, drag it, let it sit down on the grass again. And a lot of those fish will almost eat it sitting still, these Lipless baits. And around here, you know, we catch them on points and flats, and then you just reel it a lot. But I still like to do that drag maneuver a lot. A lot of the fish really like this bait on kind of a sweep, stop, sweep, stop. And those two are probably my primary shallow water baits, between a crankbait and a Lipless when I am fishing that colder water. There's situations, you know, fishing docks with a chatterbait, maybe slow rolling that big Colorado blade spinnerbait I've done a video on for, but I would say a Lipless in grass and a crankbait in dirty water are probably like my go-to baits when it comes to that. The other bait that I always keep honest is, you know, some lakes, like I mentioned, if there's no dirty water, you probably gonna have fish deep. Like you might, I'm not saying you have to, but deep's gonna be probably more productive. So that'd be a typical drop shot. A lot of baits with lakes with spotted bass, the bait gets out deep, fish get out deep. A drop shot's really good. So, you know, the minnow has dominated out deep on fish on bait, you know, for a while, but a lot of that's due to live scope. You can Damiki straight down. That's how the Damiki jighead minnow started, actually, was straight down with 2D sonar. But a lot of times in the winter, it's kind of hard to see the fish on the graph, at least to find them A drop shot is probably one of the greatest search baits. I know that sounds completely counterproductive, searching with a drop shot, but a lot of fish will get on the bottom, especially like Lake Hartwell, Lake Lanier, like Clark's Hill, these lakes that's got a lot of spotted bass and clear water. They'll get so stuck to the bottom out there in 20, 30 foot, even if you had live scope, you can't hardly see them. So what I like to do with a drop shot, if I'm in 30 foot, 20 foot, I kind of just drop it down to the bottom and drag it, like kind of drift with the wind or kind of drag it, and you will find some big schools of fish that way when you're dragging it on the bottom. Like like you would never know they were there unless your bait just drug through them. And once you catch one, then you know where that school is. You might can catch them on some other things like an underspin, a jig and spoon, something to catch them a little bit quicker. But this drop shot is a great search bait for out deep. So when it comes to like the wintertime kind of dragging drop shot like that, we use a Zoom Z-Drop worm. It's just a shad profile worm. I like worms, like long skinny worms in the summer, but in the winter, I like these shad profile worms way better. And I'm gonna Texas rig it, not nose hook it. You know, a lot of times when you're drop shotting, when you're using it on the graph, when you're dropping it at specific fish or smallmouth, things like that, I like to nose hook it. But when you're dragging on the bottom, there might be a little timber, there might be some brush. You don't wanna get hung every time you get near some good piece of cover. So I use a little bitty wide gap hook, Texas rig it, hook it right in the nose, and or hook it not in the nose, Texas rig style, not in the nose, and drag it along with, you know, typical spin rod setup, 8-10 pound test. And then that allows you not get hung, and you hook those fish pretty good. The Texas rig setup's really good, and it works great on these little shad profile worms. The Z-Drop's a good one. Use a bunch of different shad profile worms, but the Z-Drop's one of my favorites for it. And kind of, this is, I think it's called greeny weenie, but it's kind of like a greenish shad color. So you want to use something natural, and it's a great search bait out there deep for those lakes where there's more spotted bass maybe than largemouth that like to live out deep and don't get on the bank so good in that cold 40-degree water. But that's just kind of 3 techniques. Obviously, there's tons of ways. Football jig, you know, like we mentioned, shallow, the big spinner bait, jig and spoon. There's a ton of ways to catch them in the winter, but those are 3 baits that are really, really good baits for starting your search up there shallow on these lakes when you're not using your electronics. So I think it's one of those things, everybody needs to keep it honest. You know, we've got where we kind of just live scope with a minnow and a jerk bait a lot of time in the winter. But there's still other great ways to catch them between cranking and that lipless and things like that. So go get out on your water and try that to see if any of those techniques work for you.